All right, we're back. The 2026 WSL Championship Tour has commenced with CT1, the Rip Curl Pro Bells Beach, presented by Bonsoy. It is done and dusted, won by Gabriela Bryan and Miguel Pupo. Congrats to both of them. This is the Lineup Podcast. I'm Dave Prodan. I'm here with Harrison Roach. Harrison, we're honored to have you with us to break down the opening event of the season. And to be honest, we're going to try to persuade you to come back for another episode where we can learn more about your life in and your thoughts on surfing, because I think that's going to be a real treat for all of us. But for listeners out there that may not be too familiar with you, what's the 2-minute background on Harrison Roach?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I guess I'll start by saying I'm a huge surf fan, and that's surfing in all its forms, from my mum with her friends down the beach riding boogie boards in the whitewater, all the way to the WSL tour events, shortboard, longboard, body surfing, whatever it is. I love surfing. I love the ocean. I'm from Noosa Heads in Australia. We are blessed with perfect little peeling point breaks, hence why I gravitated towards a longboard in my early years. But I love riding shortboards, longboards, whatever. And yeah, I'm just a big surf fan. So it's a real pleasure to be here to get to talk about something I love.
Amazing. And as I said, we're going to persuade you to come back for a full episode in the future. In the interim, anyone that wants to just Google Harrison Roach and punch it into the YouTube algorithm, you're not going to be disappointed. The surfing it's immaculate. But we'll see how this episode goes and see if you want to come back. But on that note, the Rip Curl Pro Bells Beach, CT1 of 2026, it's in the books, as we said. Our first segment on these co-host episodes is winners and losers. For new listeners, these are strictly subjective picks from Harrison and myself, but what we're trying to get at is kind of the stories behind the results a little bit. But Harrison, you're the guest, so kick us off. Who is your first loser from Bells Beach?
Yeah, purely subjective, but also I think totally true from my perspective. I don't have to say that. But I think the biggest losers for me in the first event of the year were the rookies. Just no real huge talking points outside of that. I mean, the girls had a few missed opportunities. Anat obviously had one epic wave where she tagged it and got an excellent score, but I think that was the single excellent score from the rookie class of 2026. Few lackluster moments. There's a few heats that could have gone either way, but nothing really convincing. And you'd have to argue that the experienced tour competitors just came through and showed their class. And yet to make their mark. I'll admit it was a tricky event and really tricky conditions, stuff changing all the time. But I'd almost say that that's like more of an opportunity for a rookie class than those perfect conditions where, you know, it's not going to get any easier coming up against the best surfers in the world. So yeah, I'd say they were my first. How about you, Dave? Do you agree with that?
I mean, it unimpeachably true. I was going to ask you, Harrison, because your background, you probably have a more intimate relationship with Bells than most of us. But the tour's changed so much in the last few years. For decades, the opening event of the year was on the Gold Coast. It was on the points. It was at Snapper Rocks, or potentially around the corner at Deba, or down the point a little bit. Last few years, it's been at Pipeline. This year, it's at Bells Beach. Of those three venues, as a rookie coming in cold, what do you think would be the most challenging for some of these surfers?
Yeah, look, I think Pipe would have had to have been the most challenging. Pipe, but it's the same can be said for every single competitor. Like, what a hectic way to start the year. I would be inclined to say that Bells is a nice way to kind of lead into your competitive surfing career. I mean, the conditions, just like I said, just didn't really work out this time around. But, you know, snapper can be just as difficult, like you said, having to surf either 6 to 8 foot Kira or be over at 2 to 3 foot D-bar. They're both challenging. But, I think what I will say is that the start to the year feels a little more relaxed than it has in the past. And for whatever reason, maybe people are more comfortable knowing that they're going to spend the whole year on tour no matter what. Maybe that has something to do with it, but it did feel a little less like that pressure cooker moment this year in the first event, which I think was a good thing.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I guess pipe for a rookie, it's like it's scary either way, right? Like I think when the
That's
tour started on
everyone.
when the tour started on the Gold Coast forever, I think you're right. There was, because it's such an industry center and because it was such kind of, you're getting like shot out of a cannon in a way, there was quite a lot of pressure. I think the waves are probably a lot of fun. In the past, I've heard people talk about Bells, even over time when it wasn't the first event of the year, it really favors the veterans because it can be a marathon. You're dealing with different tides and different waves and different conditions. But good first loser for you. Mine on my side coming out of Bells would be any fantasy players, including myself, who picked Ethan Ewing as not only a fixture on their teams, but also their power surfer. Now, was this a poor decision before the event started? I don't think so. I don't think anyone could argue that, we probably are witnessing maybe within a few years a peak era of one of the best surfers on earth. And the lines that I think Ethan draws on his forehand are really like an art form, evidenced by anyone who's seen the opening episode of Stab in the Dark with him and Taj Burrow. But as it went, Ethan went down early in round 2 to returning Australian CT surfer George Pitar, 14.27 to 12.34. Kind of a slowish heat. Ethan only got 3 waves, all of which were kind of just over the mid-range scores. George looked great, both in that heat. He also looked great in the next heat that he lost. He really pushed eventual bell ringer Miguel Pupo at Winky Pop in round 3. But Ethan fantasy heads like myself, tough loss to start the year.
Yeah, and not expected for sure. I was not expecting that. Ethan, his surfing really lends itself to Bells, of course, and if you were just paying any attention to his surfing in the lead up to this year, that so far this year, there's footage of him out at Snapper. I cannot wait to see him there. He's put in a lot of time. I saw him in the flesh down at Surfing Snapper Rocks, but he's on fire right now. So I'm sure he'll it wasn't a horrible loss, it wasn't a horrible way to lose. So I'm sure he'll bounce back pretty quickly.
It's a good point. And it's not only, I think, the fantasy teams, but we've updated the game. So now there's a bracket that you can play, kind of like March Madness. And I feel like you probably heard an audible collective moan across the globe. And everyone's like, oh my God, there goes my bracket. But way it goes. Who's your second loser, Harrison?
My second loser, it's an honorable mention to who I think is the greatest surfer of all time. And no, it's not Kelly Slater because he wasn't there, but Steph Gilmore. She took a year off last year, came back. I'm sure she envisaged so many different versions of her comeback onto the tour. And how it ended up would not have been one of those, or if it was probably the worst she could have imagined it. Pretty horrible conditions. Got a grand heat total of 6.1. I just don't think Steph would have been very happy with that. It's unfortunate, and that's the nature of surfing. You got to take what you get and make the most of what's on offer. But yeah, that's my number 2, Steph Gilmore. And really, I feel like a big loser with her only getting to surf once in conditions like that because I wanted to see that. Absolutely.
And I think your point is similar with Ethan. Like anyone who's been watching Steph, especially in the lead up to the start of the season, like the clips she's been posting in the free surfs, it's like, geez, she looks like not just in peak form, but like maybe more motivated than I think a lot of us would have assumed. And I'm someone who's fortunate enough to know her and call her a friend. And it was there kind of at the start of her, world title run, and someone who's achieved so much and in the last few years has had a deserved break. And, she's always been rad when she's experimenting with kind of, alternative equipment and drawing different lines. And out of all the returning kind of world champs, she was the one that I thought, well, I wonder if she's really going to want to take a run at this. But she seems more motivated than ever. And as you said, it was not the result she wanted to start. She went straight to WA. It looks like she's preparing to kind of bounce back. But yeah, the same. Maybe the losers were all of us that were like, oh, we only got to see her surf once and the conditions were shitty.
Yeah, you only have to see Steph around a ping pong table to know that the competitive fire is still alive and well. That runs in her veins, competitiveness. So yeah, if she's back on tour, she means business, and I'm sure we're all going to benefit throughout the year this year.
Definitely. Second loser for me, and I'm going to carve out a huge exception for semifinalist Alyssa Spencer, but it were the rest of the goofy-footed women on tour. You had former women's world champ Caroline Marks, ninth place, Canadian Wunderkind, and last year's Rookie of the Year Aaron Brooks, another ninth place, Spain's Nadia Aristarbe, ninth place, Israeli rookie Anat Lelior, ninth place, Tahitian superstar Vahine Fierro, 17th place, American Sawyer Lindblad, 17th place. A lot of rookies on the women's side this year. But you contrast that to the men's side that saw the first all goofy-footed Bells final in 33 years. And yeah, it was just a different showing on the women's side. What do you think about the gender divide at Bells this year as far as the backhanders go? What were you seeing maybe on the men's side that didn't come out on the women's side?
Yeah, it's hard to say. There's so many just tiny little moments, whether it's like somebody's performance on the day or a bit of luck that goes here or there, or just the judge's willingness to give the scores. But I mean, I can't really make a call. I thought the women who got through were the women who surfed better, and goofy or regular, it's sort of besides the point at the end of the day. They just got taken down by better surfing on the day. So, we'll see. It's interesting on the men's side just how well the goofy footers did. I feel like obviously so many historical moments out at Bells. What do you think of one of the major person to do it arguably better than anyone is Oki. So you have this association with goofy footers at that location. But it is surprising to see so many on the men's side do really well. More so than, the regular footers doing well on the women's side, I think.
Yeah, totally. Well, who's your last loser coming out of Bells?
My last loser, it's a tough one because really he's another surfer I've been watching all throughout the start of the year, and the performances he's been putting on, you look at him and you think, wow, it's electric. It's Jack Robinson. Super unfortunate little situation with him and Sami Pupo. I'm not sure if it was the second round or can't quite remember, but he got an interference on Sami. And you can see how just those moments really turn a heat. There's a lot of controversy surrounding whether or not it was the right call. If you look on some comments on the WSL post, guys like Kelly Slater and even the Hazard twins and everybody, throwing in their 2 cents. And most of the surfers I saw were in Jack's camp. Sure. However, I think it was a lapse in judgment on his part. He'd already sold Sami the wave. Sami went, but he still went for a turn and he lost a bit of control as he did it. And it just allowed Sami to force the interference. And if you look at the rule book, that's totally within his rights to do. And whatever Kelly says on Instagram, he's done it a million times in the past. But yeah, it's just a tricky moment that wasn't really necessary. And you think, sure, Jack, just like Ethan, he's going to bounce back and, he's got a lot of resolve. He's an incredible surfer, but just having that throwaway hanging over your head for the rest of the year, in a year that you're really focused on a title, it's tough when it's the first event of the year because it's going to be there for the rest of it.
Yeah, it's a great call. And I mean, Sami definitely sold it. Actually, you could argue that Sami maybe worshipped at the Church of Kelly on the showmanship there. The tricky thing, I think, at that moment too, and I was noticing it between Sami Pupo, George Pitar, Baron Mamiya, those three, especially at Winky Pop, really stood out to me because they were so fast on their forehand and really dissecting kind of like a running swell at that spot. And I think when that interference happened too, Jack was already kind of behind the 8 ball score wise. And so, yeah, it's a great call. And I mean, kind of not dissimilar to Steph in a way where it's like, it feels like they're both here to win a title. And they're that focused and they just kind of have to bounce back in Oz. But yeah, last loser for me coming out of Bells runs parallel to yours as well. It's just basically your compatriots, Harrison. It's the Aussie males. The aforementioned George Pitar, he took top honors with a 9th place finish, but the rest, you got Ethan Nathan Ewing 17th, Dane Henry 17th, although I will say really a great showdown between him and Griffin Colapinto, so a lot of respect there. Joel Vaughn 20th, Morgan Sibilic 20th, Jack Robinson 20th, Liam O'Brien 33rd, Callum Robson 33rd, Oscar Berry 33rd. I saw somewhere someone mentioned that it was the first finals day in Bell's history without an Aussie male in the mix. I'll have to check on that. I'm not even sure how I'm going to check on that. But if so, yikes. I mean, that's tough. But yeah, really, geez, I mean, Harrison, as an analyst, those are pretty good losers you got there. Let's switch gears now, though. We talked losers. Who have you got for the winners coming out of Bell's Beach?
Okay. So I didn't have to think about this one for very long, actually. I think the biggest winners for me were the reigning world champs. So Yago Dora and Molly Picklum both coming away with second place. Sure, they would have loved to have won. But after taking the title in 2025, coming into what amounted to a really challenging event with really tricky conditions, nothing really went anyone's way the whole way through. You could argue, like Miggy, Gabby, they won, of course. But I think that's just if you take those results from really difficult competitions when you know you can win, when it's pumping as well, you know you're coming off the back of a title and you started your year with a second place, that is a huge win for them going into their 2026, their backup campaign. Like, what better way to start other than winning? You got to be so confident coming out of that. And they did it when it was tricky, challenging conditions. So I was stoked on that for them.
Yeah, well, I'm feeling good about my own insights here because they were my first pick as winners as well, and neither of them rang the bell. Well, they rang like a tiny runner-up bell, I guess. But as you said,
that?
like,
what's the deal with that little bell,
man? And you know what? I don't want to get into it because I would also like to go to I don't even know what the bar is called, but there's some bar in New York now where they have a bell and like you're allowed to ring it. But I mean, like, is nothing sacred? Like, I worked at Rip Curl as a kid in the shop. And if I even thought about ringing the bell, having not won the event, I would have lost my mind. I would have lost my job, and then I would have lost my mind. I'm with you though. One big bell for the winner, tiny bell, okay. But as you said, like both Iago and Molly, they're first time world champions, and I'll paraphrase the late great Andy Irons, who said once, like, everyone wants you to win your first title, and then after that you become a target. And it's another way of saying, heavy lies the crown, or the lights are really bright. More pressure, more responsibilities, more attention, busier schedules. I was down there for a few days and they were just working the entire time. And the world title hangover certainly claimed a few scalps over 5 decades of the world tour. So I just thought, as you said, they seemed so focused, so poised. They looked really exceptional to me in their maiden title defenses there at CT1. You saw Molly's round 2 dominance against Sally Fitzgibbons and a real clutch performance against Isabella Nichols in the semifinals, and Iago's semifinal buzzer beater against Gabriel Medina. That was really incredible. Awesome heat and just like a real moment. And I think if it goes Iago's way this year, we're going to look back at that and be like, that could have gone another way. And it really bounced in Iago's favor. So yeah, great pick.
Yeah, that's so true. That moment with the really, like, future forward grab and everything, and doing it against someone like Medina, because Medina is so known for doing that to everyone else. Like throughout his whole career, he's been the one pushing progression and doing the most modern maneuvers and pulling them out at the most critical junctures in heats. And so to do it against him, that's a massive win mentally. And Medina is looking bloody good this year as well, coming back on, which leads me, if I could be so bold, into my second winners, which is bouncing off what you said with the biggest losers being the Australian man. Well, you'd have to argue the Brazilians are the biggest winners if we're talking about a region, because not only did they have 3 surfers in the top 3. I mean, Miggy took the title, of course. What a huge moment for him. We've got Iago in second. We've already mentioned why he's a great winner. And then, of course, Medina, who's coming off the back of a year break as well, and looks like he's in as good a form as ever, just so strong and powerful. And as a surf fan, I'm really excited to see him on tour. I'd say Brazilian, just by default, Brazilians as a whole, as a country, they won in this event. They would have been really happy with the results. But you'd have to mention also another massive winner in that camp is Adriano de Souza, who not only is coaching both the winner and the third place finisher, but he also appears to be the spirit animal of the Brazilian Storm these days, and just a mentor, uncle, whatever, to the whole crew. And they're big winners. They'd be happy. I reckon they had a few well-deserved stiff caipirinhas after that event. Some sugary rum cocktails. Hopefully they did. I'm sure a few people on the beach in Rio definitely did. But big winners for them for me.
Man, I don't want to keep yes-anding you, but this was my second winner as well. It's just it's undeniable. I mean, the Brazilian Storm, you mentioned it, like they have 4 out of the current top 5 on the CT rankings coming out of that first event. And that doesn't even get to mentioning kind of former world champions Felipe Toledo and Idolo Ferreira. They also have Alejo Muniz. They're all sitting at 9th. They got 2026 CT rookie Mateus Herdy and João Chianca sitting at 17th. I mean, the Brazilian men, they've got 4 world champions on the current tour. And that doesn't even talk about Miguel Pupo as number 1. I'm glad you mentioned Adriano, because he is someone who, as LinkedIn reminded me, I hit 20 years at the company the other week. But like he won the World Junior title at 16. He came on tour right kind of when I was starting in the mid 2000s. And he wasn't the only Brazilian on tour, but I think he carried the torch as like, this is a legitimate world title contender. And he was alone for most of it. Like he really kind of bridged the gap between his predecessors and when the Brazilian Storm arrived. And in a lot of ways, he probably cleared the way for Gabriel to win that first world title for Brazil. And I think like an underappreciated story is like that in and of itself is a huge career accomplishment if you just end there. But for someone like Adriano to do all that, to see Gabriel ascend, and then to come back the next year in 2015 and win his own world title, like I'm just kind of amazed at the psychological fortitude to do that. But I'm glad you called him out, because it's exciting to see him back on tour.
I remember when he won the juniors. I think it was at Narrabeen, wasn't it? And I remember thinking, "Wow, who's this? Who's this guy?" And I feel like the whole world did that. Well, through his years on tour, he worked so hard. He had to, and there was a big stigma surrounding the Brazilian surfers from, narrow-minded, people who've had it their own way for a very long time. And
Sure.
Here's this really hungry competitor coming in and just, putting it to them for so many years. And yeah, I agree. He really paved the way, and now these younger surfers for sure owe him a lot. And you can see they're benefiting from his successes and all the work he put in. And now, he's giving them the confidence to go out and take everyone out. Like Miggy, we've seen a big change with him and coming on so much more confident and winning the first event of the year. God, that's got to feel good.
Couldn't agree more. Who's your third and final winner coming from the Rip Curl Pro?
So no surprises here. Gabriella Bryan is my third pick. Not only because she's come out and won the first event of the year, of course. It's a massive. She gets to ring the real bell. She's got that now. That's hers. But also because she's controlling the narrative really well. Her surfing, I think she's really built to this moment by putting on great performances in conditions that are pretty solid. And I don't hear her name mentioned without the qualification that she is the most powerful surfer on tour anymore. It's just
right.
I feel like everybody, I just kept hearing that from the commentary booth. And having had experience in competition, I know when you've got like that narrative following you around, you've got talk, not only your performances, but people are talking about you and talking about your strengths, that it really works to your advantage, because it's in the judge's mind, it's in everyone's mind, your competitors, and it gives you a bit of an edge. And I think going into Margs, where she was already pegged as a favorite for that event, she's going to be that much more confident. Everybody's going to be taking that much more notice. I think it puts her in a really good position. It's the start of the year. It's hard to say what will happen as the year goes on, but she's in fine form, and she's obviously a big winner for me out of the Bells event.
Such a good call. And I think for years, she qualified, there wasn't a ton of fanfare around her, really tight with Carissa Moore, and they had a little double act on tour, sort of a mentor-mentee thing. And as you said, she's controlled the narrative around her surfing so well. And, even pre-season, reading coverage of the CT surfers that were heading to Raglan on a few of the swells just to kind of see what that place was about ahead of the new event this season, almost to a person, whether it was sort of on the ground analysts or people watching the video, were men or women, Gabriella Bryan was the standout. And so, it's a great performance for her from Bells. Quick point of order from our producer, Miguel Clemente. I was stumbling on what the bar was in New York. It's called Old Mate's Pub. They've got the bell there. So if you're in New York ever, go check it out. Old Mate's Pub, have us out too. Harrison and myself, we'll go there. We will not go anywhere near the bell, but we'll have a beer, and we'll definitely side-eye Hugh Jackman if he approaches it again. So thanks for that, Miguel. Third winner for me. Okay, this may not rise to the level of the prior two, but I think it at least deserves an honorable mention. We've talked about returning three-time world champion and global superstar Gabriel Medina. He actually split from his long-time, I think 17-year main sponsor, Rip Curl, at the end of 2025. And now his board, it doesn't lack for stickers. I'm sure his bank account doesn't lack for funds. But the real estate on his nose has been vacant since late last year. And I would have bet dimes I would have bet dimes to dollars that someone would have tried to snatch him up before the season started, and that didn't happen. But what did happen, Gabriel turned up to the preseason content capture wearing a red Quicksilver hoodie. Social media started spiraling over it. He then went on to wear Quicksilver wetsuits and gear during the event. No sticker on the board. I'm not going to name names, but word on the street down at Bells was a cunning Quicksilver staffer actually called Gabe up before the event and said, hey, look, no pressure, but if you need anything while you're in Bells, clthing, wetsuits, whatever, we put your name down at the board rider shop. Just help yourself. He certainly did. So honorable mention to the Quicksilver staffer who had a pretty savvy move with arguably the most sought after surfer in the world ahead of his return to the championship tour.
Big win for Quicksilver there. That was easy. Didn't cost him anything.
Yeah. Well, even if it did, retail wise, it's that's got to be the cheap. That's got to be the cheapest endorsement that Quicksilver Gabe signed in about 20 years.
Bang for buck there. It's fun.
I enjoyed it. Well, Harrison, excellent winners and losers for us from the Rip Curl Pro Bells Beach presented by Bon Sawyer. We're going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to talk about surfboards. Don't go anywhere. This episode is presented by Rourke. Rourke makes essential gear for the modern traveler, inspiring our community to seek adventure wherever in the world they may find themselves. Whether chasing swell, scaling cliffs on a remote atoll, or running through dense jungle trails, Rourke knows adventure never fails. Check out Rourke.com for all your adventure travel needs. Welcome back to the Lineup Podcast. I'm Dave Prodent here with Harrison Roach. Harrison, it's time to talk about surfboards. The CT Shaper rankings, we've been running those since 2023. It's a combined ranking of men's and women's performances on the boards of the world's best CT Shapers. For 3 years running, we've seen back-to-back wins from San Clemente's Matt Biolis and Lost Surfboards. Amazing run. It's sort of like a mid-90s Chicago Bulls level run. And in the past 3 years, we've counted all the results from the quarterfinals or better. That obviously gives an advantage to the bigger programs, but we did that because we wanted to kind of reflect the agency surfers have, when they're choosing to ride who they want to ride for. In the off season, we did a lot of discussion with the surfboard shapers, with the surfers, got a lot of feedback from the community. We modeled some potential adjustments, and we actually decided to update the way we're calculating the rankings for 2026. So moving forward, the way we're counting, it is still all the shapers are going to be ranked across all the events. They're only going to receive points for their surfers from the quarterfinals or better. But instead of potentially 16 surfers, because there's 16 across the men's and women's events, we're capping it at a max of 2 results per board program per event. So it can come from the best 2 women, best 2 men, or one of each. And just for clarity for the listeners out there, we did run this same model across the last 3 years. Lost Surfboard still wins each season, but the competition is a lot tighter. Big wind up. Before we get to the Surfboard Empire CT Shaper rankings presented by Vea from Bells, Harrison, you probably have like a relatively unparalleled perch in terms of surfboard insights, in that you've not only ridden a number of different shapers, but also a number of different shapes. And I was wondering if you could start by giving us just a little bit of background on your personal approach to thinking about surfboards, the ones you ride, when you ride them, and what you've been riding lately.
Yeah. I've definitely spent my whole life trying to ride the most appropriate board for the conditions. But that is sort of morphed into as well, like the most appropriate board for my mood and for what I'm most excited about at the time. So it's a little less focused these days on whether or not, you should be riding that particular board at that particular time, but it might more reflect like what I'm up to. Am I feeling lazy and just want to ride a mid-length that I can paddle around the current on, or do I want to try rip like my my imaginary 18-year-old self when I was riding shorties a lot and ride my new monster from JS? I don't know, but yeah, surfboards to me, they're all amazing, and every way to approach a wave is really great. And I just try to do what sort of suits my mood and the conditions. And I think that's been a really rewarding way to approach surfing, because it's always changing. I think also it's maybe hindered a little bit about hindered my skill in all of them to a degree, because I don't put quite as much time into the one piece of equipment. But all in all, I'm at definitely a net benefit from changing it up all the time, because that's what I'm into. So yeah, it's how I have fun.
Well, I think your insights as well as your current relationship with JS is going to come in handy, because the Tractors, they had a banner event. They're sitting at number 2 on the current Surfboard Empire CT Shaper rankings presented by Vea, heading into Margaret River. Lost Surfboards, 3-time CT Shapers of the year. They ended up in first. They had Gabriel O'Brien with her win, Iago Dora at runner-up. Hard to beat those results. Barely able to beat those results, frankly. But they had another strong showing. They had other team riders, right? Griffin Colapinto in 3rd, Betty Lucicura Johnson in 5th. JS, as we talked about, Miguel Pupo in 1st, Samuel Pupo in 5th, and they also had Kanoa Igarashi in 5th. DHD 3rd, Sharp Eye 4th, Channel Islands 5th, and then Cabianca in 6th under foot of Gabriel Medina with his 3rd place finish. When you're watching a CT event, Harrison, like, what stands out to you about boards? Because, contrary to probably the way that you approach surfboards, contrary to how most people kind of ride surfboards, the CT, they're really selecting equipment and designs and construction in a pretty narrow parameters, because they're trying to do something so specific. But was anything stand out to you even about that kind of phenomenon when you're watching the Rip Curl Pro?
I think it's really tough for them. I think they're, on the one hand, it really pays to center in on the same style of board and to focus on that and to ride it in every different circumstance, because it's constantly changing in the water. And if you know this board through and through, you're going to do your best surfing no matter what's thrown at you. I'd say also there's maybe a bit of missed opportunity when you could afford to mix it up in certain conditions, but it's a pretty bold maneuver, right? Like I heard in a recent podcast you actually did with Joel Parkinson, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but somebody's got to be bold enough to do it. And I think if you look historically at those people, and you definitely think Kelly Slater paddling out at backdoor or paddling out at snapper or just riding equipment that really changed people's perspectives, I think there's a lot of pushback. people really didn't like it. And it's an unfortunate thing about us as human beings. We don't like things to stand out. Even though on a deeper level, I think we really love it, but in that context, I think it opens you up for criticism that you might not receive otherwise. So it takes a bold surfer to make that leap. I think, as over the past 10 years or so, we've watched alternative fun boards, like this fun board term. Like, what are you riding if you're not having fun? It's kind of ridiculous to me. But we've seen the gap being bridged. It's now twin fins and alternative equipment are super high performance. So I think as time goes on, we're going to get a bit more like that, but it's going to be difficult to, with the scales, judge whether or not you're better off mixing it up all the time. I still think just sticking to that one board and really knowing it through and through, it's hard to beat that. It's going to be hard. 'Cause from experience, I paddle out and I'm trying to figure out a board for the first 4 waves every time I surf. So it can be a challenge.
It's a good point, and I think I appreciate you referencing the Joel podcast too, because I was struck by just the way he kind of framed it, where he's like, you have to be really bold. And the example of Kelly is a good one, and I don't know if it was so much a boldness from Kelly, but I'm sure he's brought this up in the past. It's like, I think at that point in his career, he was almost bored, where he's like, well, I want to try something different. And as you said, like, human beings and kind of the hive mind, like we love to push back and pick things apart where it feels different. When he rode the Deep Six at Pipe, I think this is like late 2000s, maybe 2008, he won the event. And I think a lot of people were like, whoa, like check this thing out. And I think at least Britt on the Channel Island side would say that the Deep Six inspired some of sort of the Paizel designs too, with sort of the wider point. Yeah, sure, yeah. I'm not an expert, but I'm just sort of reporting on what I've heard. But then, same with Kelly, right? Like a couple of years later, he rode the Wizard Sleeve at the first event of the year on the Gold Coast. It was the year that Julian Wilson was a wild card, and it was kind of shitty small snapper. And Kelly lost riding that board, and everyone just blamed the board.
And he was ripping too, though.
He was ripping, and that whole window, like a couple days later, he's surfing 4-foot Green Mountain. I'm like, this board looks amazing. But even Kelly at that point, like abandoned the board. He's like, oh no, I don't want to hear like the chorus of voices complaining about like what I'm writing, even though I'm that accomplished. It's really silly. And, I think Wardo's ridden the round nose fish in the final at small snapper. I always reference like the Dane Reynolds on the MTFA out at Senos against Roy Powers, but outside of that, maybe Felipe Toledo is the only one that I kind of see experiment, right? He rides kind of carbon boards a little bit more than other people. He rode that quad at Lowers when he won his world title. But if you kind of looked at the venues on tour, like what events do you think would maybe lend themselves to a CT surfer being bold and maybe selecting like a performance 2+1 or something like that?
Yeah, that's just it. I don't really see any, because I'm not really seeing the competitors out there riding those boards enough to justify. And we see most sessions these days of professional surfers. They've always got a filmer down there, and with social media, you're watching replays of their surfs each day. But I'm not seeing a lot of the tour competitors experimenting. Maybe a few fun days here and there, you see them go out and have a grovel, but until we really see somebody dedicated to it and putting them in really intense conditions and surfing super hard, I find it hard to imagine. I mean, obviously snapper, it's a small pockety wave face, but again, that's also one of the most high performance shortboard waves in the world. So it's hard to go past that like JS style thruster. That's what they're made for, that perfect steep cupped out right hander. You could argue Ragland potentially, but in saying that, I think it still has a wide open face and can lend itself to a bit more of that longer rail. I don't know. It's tricky for me to see. It's certainly not Margaret River. I think we can guarantee they won't be riding a twin fin with a trailer out there. But I don't know, maybe lowers.
Yeah, maybe.
Are there any that stand out to you? I'm interested to hear what you think.
Man, it's tough. Like it's such a, I feel like there's not too many people that care to even like nerd out on it, frankly. Like, and I'm like I kind of don't have a lot of people to talk about too. When I was down in Australia, I was bringing it up repeatedly and probably annoying people. And one of the interesting points of feedback I'd get from both surfers and then also shapers would be, well, no one wants to take that first step. And I guess to Joel's point, be bold, because they think that the judges are going to underscore them if they're riding like something with a wider outline, which is interesting. It's obviously like a subjectively scored sport. I don't know. I've traveled with the judges for 20 years and that's never even come up. I think the balance would be like your ability to draw different lines is like sometimes a huge advantage. I think you said Raglan, that one stands out to me, is maybe having, depending on the size of the swell, like a face that you do want to see a bit more speed and some different lines. But yeah, it's really tough. And I mean, the other thing I've heard from some of these shapers too, and I'm not really betraying any confidences, but what they've said is like, well, we're actually hiding a lot of kind of like souped up alternative board components into the look of like high performance shortboards. So we're like hiding some foam, we're hiding some different kind of like rail attributes and concaves, just to avoid the maybe the unfounded concern by the CT surfers that they're going to be underscored if they're riding something that looks like a traditional fish.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. We say like somebody has to be bold. I think the issue is that we've seen, like the good example is that Kelly against Julian, like we've seen somebody be bold and not be rewarded for it. So it's gonna take, it's just, there's this hangover from that it's going to take somebody who really comes out and just dominates. But I just haven't seen anybody putting the time in on those craft.
I think that's the right point. Like, we just haven't seen the time being put in, and yeah, maybe the stakes have gotten too high. Like we've succeeded too much in creating too much pressure that no one wants to kind of break outside the box a little bit. But yeah, geez, for a community that fancies itself as progressive nonconformist, we're pretty conservative sometimes on certain topics.
Don't even get me started on that.
We'll save that for the other podcast that you and I
yeah, for sure. There's a bit for me to talk about there. Don't me tell you.
I'll bet. Now, the longboard tour is obviously a different beast, but are there any parallels equipment-wise in terms of like, you know, in terms of performing on that kind of canvas? Are people relatively conservative in the actual boards they ride in competition, or is there a little bit more kind of a liberal approach to equipment?
Longboarding is totally different. All the boards are really, really different. You're hard-pressed to find, unless you're riding the same shaper, your boards are completely different to the person next to you. Longboarding's super fascinating like that. I think it's one of the most challenging things about competitive longboarding is that there's so much more room for subjectivity in longboarding than in shortboarding. And I think it makes shortboarding a little easier to understand because everybody's like conformed to that level and riding the same boards. Whereas longboarders have boards that are so different that it completely changes their approach. And it can be really challenging to sort of differentiate between two guys or girls at their peak to judge who's better. It's really a challenge. But I was commentating the Bells event last year for the WSL Longboard Tour, and I was like you, I was walking around asking questions about surfboards, and I was really excited because I think now for longboarding, we've seen it go from this high performance, basically just big, long shortboard approach when I was a kid to being more traditionalist, really harkening back to the 60s style longboard to now having a really modern longboard, which kind of takes the best of being able to turn and that performance approach, but also has a strong, it's really important to have a good nose rider. And the stuff that people are riding are really exciting, and it inspired me to come home and make a couple of new boards with my shaper, Thomas Bexon. But there's so much diversity in the craft. I just couldn't believe it. The world's best are riding completely different boards in longboarding. It's kind of hilarious.
I think that's like, I just think that's like really, really exciting. And it harkens back to like when I'd bother like Rabbit or MR about like, tell me everything about when you were competing on tour. And, such an interesting drumbeat of the energy and excitement on tour in those days was like, well, a lot of the surfers were shaping their own boards, and there was just so much freedom of design. Is like you turn up at a series of events and you'd be like, what the hell is this person riding? And then you'd see them out there and they're like, well, how did that do that? And it was like, it felt like it was just a little more mystical at that time, and there was a little more magic in it because everything hadn't been like overly democratized by the information age.
Yeah, I guess there's a small issue with shortboarding that it's going to be hard to ever get past, is that we're really maneuver focused. It's not like back in the day where, maneuvers count for a lot, but the wave as a whole really counts, like from the takeoff to the kick out, and everything really counts in that way. And you could argue it's the same now, but I would definitely say to a lesser extent. Really, it matters what you do in the lip and off the bottom. Like, it's the maneuver that counts, and that's what gets you the scores. Longboarding for sure is a little more about how you surf the whole wave, and style and flow is a massive part of the judging scale. But yeah, it's like I said, it's tricky because it's subjective, and I don't know that it would work that well in the modern shortboard tour. I think they're doing the best that they can as judges, and the way the scales are set and the way the format is, I couldn't make it any better. It's still super entertaining, but yeah, we maybe lose a little bit of that like expression for the same reason, but. You catch 22. Like, how do you manage that? I think they got it pretty good at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's well said. There are two kind of case studies at Bell's on high-profile surfers. They've been with shapers for quite a long time. You had Katie Simmers, who's ridden Chris Borst designs out of San Diego for years. She was riding a Sharp Eye, a Marcia Zuvi at Bell's. And then you had Gabriel Medina, who's been riding Johnny Cabiancas for years. Started getting some Channel Islands boards. Started actually via conversation with Bobby Martinez. You want to get the Bobby Quad. During the off season, got some more short boards. They both turned up at Bell's. Gabe opted to stick with the Cabiancas. Katie rode the Sharp Eyes. Any impressions on either of those surfers? And just, I guess, the idea of maybe being the only surfer working with a shaper, the only CT surfer working with a shaper, compared to being part of sort of a broader team.
Yeah, it's tricky. I think you can't deny the Cabianca Medina relationship, like how much success that they've had over the years. It's it's a big move. I like, I from my perspective, I see way more value in Medina sticking with his shaper of all time, Cabianca, than experimenting outside of that and trying something with a new shaper. However, like, results speak for themselves. So we haven't really seen what Medina could start doing if he got on the Channel Islands boards with Britt a bit more consistently and more often. It's hard to say, but I'm a bit of a loyalist in that way. Like, I've ridden Thomas surfboards my whole life. I've always ridden other boards like Medina is doing, but when it comes down to it, like, that relationship is so powerful, and there's so much confidence that comes with riding the boards you've always ridden. Katie Simmers, didn't get a lot of opportunity to see her in this event on the Sharp Eyes, but she's one of my favourite surfers, and I kind of just want to support her no matter what she's doing. So really excited. There must be something in those boards that really excites her, and that excites me. I just think, it's a tough gig. I guess if you need to make the change, but I mean, the Medina Cabianca thing, like, nobody really makes boards the same. That he was the first guy to see a lot of volume. I don't really know everything, but Medina riding really boards with heaps of volume and just dominating them, like, he's so powerful. Just makes a lot of sense to me for him to keep riding those. Yeah, we'll see how Katie goes. Is she going to ride a Sharp Eye in Marks too? Is she a full team rider for Sharp Eye now, or?
I haven't seen anything announced, so I think it'll be interesting, and I think it's fun too, right? Like I like as board geek, like whether it's like stab in the dark stuff or the electric acid or the CT Shaper rankings, like the board builders, they're all so competitive, and it's if nothing else, it's sort of just created a framework to talk about them through, where it's like, let's look at the numbers, like who have you got and how did they do, and I think it's almost kind of the modern equivalent of like, not the modern, it's almost the surfing equivalent of like F1's Constructor Cup of like, well, who went where and how are these teams going?
I think it's
who
quite
has
a
the
bit
hot
borrowed.
hand?
I think there's quite a bit
question.
From the F1.
Yeah.
You can see it's really entertaining. I love to talk about it. And I think it adds just another layer to the tour that, there's another title that these guys care a lot about as shapers. And so it'll be really interesting to watch the year unfold in that way. Just one last note, I think too, the difference maybe between the Simmers and the Medina is that Simmers does seem very intuitive and a bit more experimental in her approach, and kind of see she's drawn to that a little bit. So I feel like she'd be used to doing different things a little more than Medina, whereas it'd be bit more of a bigger step to bridge away from like somebody with such a long-standing relationship. Katie's still so young, but yeah, well,
that's
really
a great point.
I'm talking about. We'll see what happens.
No, I think that's a good insight. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the rest of the Aussie treble leg. But before we break from the surfboard talk, Harrison, you mentioned you're riding for Thomas Surfboards. You're also riding for JS. Like it's probably impossible to ask, but like in a week of varying different waves, like what's kind of the 5-board quiver? Like what models are you kind of keeping in rotation for yourself?
Well, we've got a new longboard. This is based off that experience I had down in Bells that Thomas and I have designed together and put into the works, called the New Faithful, and it's like a nose rider with a bit of edge in the last 2 inches of the tail, or 1.5 inches. Little bit of flip. That's really just totally got me so inspired again to longboard. That's been really fun. I've got a little mod fish, which is a sort of modern take on the keel fish. So with regard to your shortboard fun boards or alternative fish boards, it's still very much in line of the original Steve List style San Diego fishes. But if you're in that park from San Diego, you'd be thinking, no, that's not at all like a Steve List fish. So it sits somewhere in the middle of the alternative shortboard and the original. It's a really cool board. And then my other 3 boards are probably the JSs. So I've got the Big Baron, which I came on to the JS team to get involved in. They put a few under my feet, and I couldn't believe just how functional it was, and everything from like a tiny shore brake to like kind of 6-foot South Stratty pumping barrel beachies. This is just this really versatile board. Everybody jokes about it being like an old guy's board, but people have been saying that about my board since I was 10 years old, so that's all right. Like if you get over the ego and realize you're not as fit as you once were, it might be fun to ride a mid-length every now and then. And I've got a little zero fusion or zero gravity fish thing from JS as well. That's just the ultimate in shore brake heaven. Go out and try 30 airs, not land one, and just a stoke grommet. But the one when the waves are good, that's really just makes me feel like I know how to surf is the Monster. And Jace has been working a lot on that over the last couple of years. I mean, forever, but they've had some strong wins with that board. And I tell you what, I put it under my feet, and if the surf's 2 to 4 foot or 6 foot and pretty good, I'm like absolutely loving that, because off the bottom of my backhand into a big turn, it makes me feel like I'm a shortboarder again. So I've been really enjoying that. It's nice to have the contrast between a guy like Thomas and a guy like Jace. They're from two very different backgrounds, and the only reason that it works that I can ride for both is that, that they're so different. They're not competitors at all in the same space, and I just feel really lucky to get to work with them.
Well, lineup listeners, you guys heard it here first. The current world number one, Miguel Pupo, rides Harrison Roach's JS model, so that's pretty cool. I'm joking, but no, that's. I mean, man, that makes me pretty eager to check out both Thomas Surfboards and the JS website. So thanks for that, Harrison. We're gonna wrap it there for Surfboard Talk. We're gonna take one more break, and when we come back, we're gonna answer some listener questions, and then we'll get out of there. Don't go anywhere.
All right, welcome back to the Lineup Podcast. My name's Harrison Roach, and I'm here with Dave Proden, and we're about to talk about some Instagram questions that people have sent over to @thelineuppod on Instagram. First one for you, Dave, is from Lonnie___Coco. Gabriella plans to utilize 2 different coaches. What's the pros and cons to this strategy?
Oh man, that's honestly probably a better question for a surf reviewability, Harrison. But I'll take a crack. I mean, I think what I've seen on tour over the last couple of decades is it really does take a village with some of these surfers. And that's not to say all coaches kind of do the same thing. Like you might have technique coaches, you might have like competitive strategy coaches, like you might have coaches that are really just sort of sounding boards. I often think of, famous Australian Stephen Bell was Kelly Slater's coach for a number of years. And I remember I'd always hear people be like, well, how do you coach the greatest surfer of all time? Like, what are you actually telling him? But so much, I think, is like that coach in that relationship becomes like a security blanket and like a sounding board and a filter where like Kelly would be throwing thoughts off of Belly and Belly would be filtering them and being like, yes, that is right. And like reassuring him because, surfing's such a unique sport in that it takes place in like the most dynamic field of play that like any sport has with the ocean. And so unlike other sports where you could be like the strongest, fastest, most talented and have like quite a lot of confidence that you are going to win because you should win, you put in the work, you can have all those things in surfing and the ocean's still in charge. So I think it really lowers the confidence threshold even of the world's best. And so back to the Gabriella point, I think the pros are as long as they're aligned and they're not telling you conflicting things, you're just getting like a chorus of voices that might be rounding out the same approach. And I guess, it's not dissimilar to the conversation we were just having about surfboards. There's some surfers that they only ride one shaper. There's other surfers who ride a bunch. Jordy Smith's one of those surfers where he doesn't have just one shaper. He might ride Pattersons or DHDs or Mayhems or JSs or Smith shapes. And he seems to make it work. And sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't work. But I don't know, Harrison, what do you think about that with like, having not just one coach, but multiple coaches in your corner for one campaign?
Yeah, I don't have any experience with coaches. Longboarders don't really make enough money to do it, let alone have a coach to pay. However, over the years, I did inevitably have just some people who I felt like were in my court, and like you said, they would just say little things here and there that ended up helping in the long run. And I think the thing for me is like if she feels confident in having those voices, if she feels more confident as a result of having them in her court, then that's going to work for her. So, I think it's the more people, the better. Like you said, it takes a village. But yeah, as long as they're people who instill confidence in you, then you're winning.
Yeah, great point.
So we got another question here from Tony Taish. Would love to hear more about the maternity wildcard, Dave.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, that's a good question, actually, because that's something that's new. It's been established by the tours department at the WSL. We work with the Surfer Advisory Council, which are like 12 surfers from the CT. And yeah, they've established a maternity wild card. It's starting in 2027. And it's actually being awarded to Joanne DeFay for 2027. And Tatiana Weston Webb, who's also had a little baby, she's been awarded a WSL season wild card. So they're slightly different, but it's basically sort of some like kind of rule book bureaucracy on the back end. But in elevating kind of the women's tour from 16 surfer fields to 24 surfer fields. The tours team was able to carve out, a maternity wild card in addition to the season wild card, which is great because I think over the history of the sport, we've seen, amazing surfers on the women's side who have either had to, put off personal decisions or who have made personal decisions, and that's impacted their career in a way where they're not able to come back to the sport. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say long overdue, but maybe it is overdue. And I'm certainly excited that they did it, and it's coming on. But I don't know, Harrison, if you have any thoughts on the maternity wild card for 2027.
I think it's awesome. And I mean, in every other job, at least in Australia, you get maternity leave to go and have your child. And it's incredibly important for these professional athletes to be able to go and do that and have a family. And, they shouldn't lose as a result of that. So yeah, big ups to the WSL. Perhaps could have happened sooner, but look, it's great. I'm really happy about that.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question too.
Our last question is from Dane Lad. It sounds like this guy might be an Aussie. I might be wrong, but do you think alternative boards have a place on the world tour?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, we could have started with this question. I feel like we talked about it a lot already. I personally would love to see it. I mean, I'm a fan though, so I'm not the one putting my neck on the line. I think Harrison, you spoke to it so well. And yeah, geez, I just wonder if it's it just kind of spices things up if we're able to see it out there. And at the end of the day, if some of these, I'm trying to articulate this because it's just, and I don't know how you feel about this too. I kind of think of the term alternative boards as almost like the term traditional surfing. I understand what it means, and I understand most people aren't trying to have a negative connotation when they say that, but traditional surfing could be taken that way, right? Where it's well, that's kind of old, but it's not the way people when someone like myself in the past maybe has described that kind of surfing as traditional, it's this is mind blowing. It is taking classic lines but applying them on a new canvas. And I think the same thing with alternative boards. Maybe that's why everyone's getting the judging stigma on if I ride an alternative board, they're going to think it's cheating or something. They just maybe need it's a marketing issue. Maybe they need to be called indie boards or something like that. I don't know. But what do you think? We talked about the alternative boards on the world tour, but what do you just think about maybe the naming conventions associated with this kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's a challenge. And I've seen it we touched on it as well on the longboard tour. I've seen it without the naming conventions. And I think if you've got a lot of confidence in your judging panel to be able to recognize maybe why things are the way they are and they're looking different because he's riding a board that's a little different shape, and you take it for what it is, not for what it could be or what it was or whatever, then you could, it's more challenging, but it'd be great to see. And like you, as a surf fan, I would love for things to be spiced up with regard to the equipment people are riding and see people do things differently, because that makes it more exciting for me as a fan.
Yeah. Well, thanks to everyone big challenge. It's easy for us to say, but we just keep beating the drum and be like, come on. Well, thanks to everyone that wrote in at the lineup pod. Harrison, this has been so great. Before we go, any kind of on the spot predictions for what you think is going to happen in WA at the Western Australia Margaret River Pro?
I think the box is going to come back into play because it's been a while. So I really hope we get to see that. And I think Jack's got a couple of new boards from JS and Forget-Me-Nots, and I've seen some surfing he's been doing on those. And if we can see that at either or, whether he's out of the box, of course, he's a master out there, but even on main break, I think he's going to be really tough to beat. On the women's side, hard to go past Molly for me. Again, if we end up at the box, I reckon we're going to see her rushing over the ledge along with Katie. But yeah, I think that'll throw a few spanners in the works. But I'm looking at those three surfers, I think, if that happens.
Love it. Harrison Roach, thank you so much for coming on the lineup. We're definitely going to try to have you back in the future. And yeah, man, I hope you get some waves very, very soon.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Cheers.